Here's where jQuery gets really, really dirty for the unexposed and dangerous for those unexposed when they try to get serious. jQuery hides stuff from you, like the fact that JavaScript has crazy scope. This, in a function, is not guaranteed. Like, how crazy is that? You call this dot magic, and this could be the global scope, this could be any object that it gets applied with, which is dangerous. And jQuery completely hides that from you. So when you use events in jQuery, you call this and it refers to the DOM element. That's kick-ass. That's what you wanted. But that's not JavaScript, that's jQuery. So you gotta keep that in mind. Like if you ever move away from jQuery, things break if you expect them to work the way jQuery makes them work. Which brings me to my last point about jQuery. It hides how JavaScript actually works from you by being awesome. So don't get lazy, don't get sloppy. Know what's going on and realize how kick-ass jQuery is because of it, not sort of in place of it. Dom diddling. Who diddles a Dom? Yeah? I diddle a Dom. In public right now. Sorry. I've been awake for a long time. Sorry. What I mean by this, of course, is that you have to do DOM manipulation. That's why JavaScript exists, pretty much. Like you use JavaScript to change the DOM, to load stuff in, to hide stuff, to make advanced interactions take place. Like JavaScript is great for that. The only problem is you don't really know what's happening when you say, move this element over here, swap in these other elements. You know, my shopping cart has been updated. Someone clicked remove this item, remove that item from the DOM, it goes away. What's actually happening? And it turns out it's not quite what you expect, and the browser does a whole lot of work for you a lot of the time when it could be doing simple stuff. So if you're showing and hiding, that should happen in CSS. That should not be a JS thing. You can easily apply a class to something. That's a quick browser reflow, no big deal. If you do magic like style.display none, like that's more expensive, and it's also harder to manage over the long run. It's much easier to say parent container, hide all the elements in this container, or hide selected elements in this container, and use CSS classes for that. Makes life easy. Positioning. Everyone here know positioning like absolute versus relative versus static? Anybody? Yeah? Okay. Am I talking to a crowd that's here? Okay. So, relative positioning is great, right? Like you can offset stuff. You can move it around the target. Turns out though that costs you a lot of reflows if you do it a lot. Like it's expensive. But if you position absolutely, almost every single browser, I think IE6 is the only one that doesn't handle it well, and it still handles it better than relative. IE6 and the rest of them, they do much better with absolute positioning. So position absolutely when you can, and use absolute positioning to move stuff around the page. If you're doing like whiz-bang, like bottom of the right corner, or in the case of Facebook chat, like everything's bound to the bottom right edge of the screen all the time. That's a JavaScript trick. We use as much CSS as possible, but where it comes to JavaScript, we don't position relative as much as possible because of reflow issues. So reflow, everybody know reflow? Reflow is the execution of the renderer that causes the page to lay out. And when you move stuff around, the browser has to reflow based on it, has to re-render when things move around. And if something's positioned absolutely with CSS, it doesn't reflow the entire page, it reflows those elements that are moving around. And it's cheaper that way. Yeah, see? So there's an example of it. Yelling out and you get a clarified answer. I'm going to move quickly because I want to have lots of questions at the end. So. Gotcha. So you good? More? Take more. Okay. So who here has worked on pages that are just gigantic, right? Everything? Yeah? It's frustrating. Yeah, because everything takes so much more time. It's like a tree. It's like binary search or any of those algorithms. Like they get more expensive the taller the tree gets. And that's the same is true of the DOM. So if you can keep your DOM shallow by having more sibling nodes and using CSS to put stuff where it belongs, your page is more efficient, everything's faster. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that because that's a fundamental thing. You have to think about that from the moment you start creating a page to the end to use CSS to achieve the layout you want. The last point is an important one, especially here in Nashville. I've been here. Every single client wants you to make it sparklier, make the green greener, make the transparency more transparent, right? That's Dom diddling for Dom diddling's sake, and that's not good. The browser is not Flash, right? Flash is Flash, and it's got its issues of its own, like the fact that it's dying. So the moral of the story is, don't do stuff to the browser, don't do stuff to the page that don't need to be done. If it needs to be done in order to achieve the user experience you want, then do it. Otherwise, just don't. Like, push back on your clients, push back on whoever's pressuring you to make the page spin around 5 times whenever you move the mouse across the screen twice. Like, don't do that shit. Yeah. Link tag, right? Oh, sorry. Page state. This this is one of my last big points here. Who knows what I'm talking about when I say page state? Anybody? I got a little guy over the corner. So page state is whenever the page loads and you want to do stuff, like when you click on an element, what happens? When that's determined by metadata associated with DOM nodes, that's page state. That means this element is visible, that element isn't visible. If you've got a browser-based game, the whole thing is page state. Let's say you've got a game where you move blocks around. That's page state. So a common thing is to have a div and the rel tag, and in the rel tag you just embed a bunch of serialized data, right? Who's done it? Come on, I've done it. Yeah, I see one hand. Who else has done it? Yes, go, you done it. Yeah. Fail sauce. Butter fail sauce. Don't do that shit. What's that? Dirty. It is. So DOM is for HTML. That's what DOM is good at. It's called DOM, not page state DOM. Okay, I'm sorry, it's terrible metaphor. What we learned at Facebook is that you build a formal framework for page state, and you do associations with DOM element handlers. So whenever you render the page, anything that has to be associated with some state data, you make that association with the DOM element that's created, and you maintain that. It's a rewrite API. So let's say it's a friend list, and it's a friend list with unread messages next to it, and the unread messages changes. You don't have to traverse the DOM, find the thing, find its rel tag, deserialize the data in the rel tag, increment the unread count by 1, serialize the data, write the rel tag, update the DOM, and let the page render. You just find the place in your metadata where that's done, you find the element, you put the value in there, and it's done. I'm not going to get into the gory details of that because it's a complicated thing. But the bottom line is you do a formal mapping of DOM elements to state objects, and those state objects are rewrite. Lastly on the page state thing is global scope. How many of you put an array in global scope and just you write shit to the array and it works, right? Is that called class or name? No, buddy? It happens. People do it. I see it all the time. I was going to pull out examples from people who are here, of their code, but I want to be an asshole, so I didn't. People do it a lot. So the bottom line is the global scope is like a dirty, scary place. It's like a bathroom downstairs. You want to put your stuff into it as little as possible. Don't touch anything, for God's sake. And put your stuff away when you're done as quickly as possible and wash your hands. So namespace, right? Put the least amount in the global scope that you can put in and have it just work. Because you have control over the namespace that you're in. And that's what I have. That is the super fast fly-through of it. And now I'd like to open it up because I'm sure I moved much faster than everybody was comfortable with. So if you've got questions, just tell me to go back to the slide and we'll go back to it and talk.
When you talk about that formal mapping, do you have an example or something? It sounds really interesting to me. It's the whole rewrite discussion that here's more about that.
So I can give you a design for it. I won't give you the exact proprietary thing. You can find it. If you decompile our page, you can find it. But I'm not supposed to talk about our exact implementation of it. The question was, what is that formal mapping between metadata and page state data, so to speak, and DOM elements? What does it look like? In one of our internal projects, actually it just went open source though, I can talk about it. So we have a project called Javelin. It was written by one of our hard-in-the-yard mofos. This guy's good. He wrote it, and it works by, when you instantiate the page, there's one on-ready listener. Everything else listens for that. It has its own event delegation. It basically supplants the way the browser does events. It says, browser, you do events okay, we're going to do events better. And it does that by making it possible to trigger and dispatch arbitrary events of any sort. So in that context, with having this replacement sort of for the browser event model, there is a global namespace, and the global namespace has a data object. With that data object, there is a mapping of data IDs to a metadata object. And in each object in the DOM, there's a class name, of course. There's the class name attribute in JavaScript. And there's a serialized sort of magical class that you never touch, you ignore, you pretend it doesn't exist, and that is our version of the serialized rel tag. But all it is an identifier that lets the DOM know that there's metadata associated with it. So whenever you interact with it, you say, element, give me your metadata. It says, what's your ID? Extracts it from the class name via regex. It goes into its global namespace for data. It finds that ID, and it returns you that object in a handler sense so you can read and write to it. And that way you have rewrite access to it throughout the course of the page, and you never have to inject stuff into the DOM for it to happen because you identify it with data one time and one time only. And it's a unique identifier from there. So every time you add a new identifier to the page, it increments the counter by 1. 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Do you use test suites? How do you do
Yes? No? We test ourselves. We are really, really good at testing thoroughly, and we do a phased rollout. So whenever a feature gets created, we test it internally, like individually. Like I will go to a VM and I will test everything. Then we will pass it on, it gets reviewed, other people test it, they confirm that it works, and then we phased roll it out to us, like an internal portion. It's internal for a week, it goes to internal and then some prod, and so forth. So we have no, for front end especially, there's no unit testing. We're just getting to that. It's we're using the water framework for that. And it's minimal, and we mostly rely on us being badasses to do it right. Which isn't scalable if you have people who suck, but if you've got awesome people, it works. So yeah, it's dangerous. It's sort of Wild West, but up to 500 X million users, we're good.
How good are you guys then at testing for the stupid stuff you would expect users to want to do that they think is something?
Give me an example.
Like, you think that they should type, they click submit, but at first they type, then they click somewhere else, then they click back, then they click somewhere.
We try to avoid that by leaving the DOM in a state that works after people's interactions with it. So we never leave the DOM in an unstable state. You can refresh the browser. The only exception to this is the long pole connection for chat. With chat, we have a long pole that goes on using comment. That's the common name for it, which means we continuously send stuff to your browser. In those cases, if you refresh the page or do something crazy that kills the connection in the middle of it, you'll get JavaScript errors because the connection has been interrupted. For everything else, the DOM is always in a stable state. So you can just walk away from it, you can do crazy stuff, and the page is cool. And then for, like if you do crazy stuff, like we do a lot of XSS testing. We have an entire team that's devoted to site integrity. Every input field, every mechanism by which we consume content into the system, it's filtered like crazy. Like if you can get something into the site that's illegal or invalid or like a worm, for instance, a JS worm, we'll hire you. Questions?
You were talking earlier about graceful degradation.
Yeah.
You guys debated about progressive enhancements and going that route instead?
We have. That's actually a really good question because we are exploring that right now. For desktop browsers, we don't. For desktop browsers, we say, what can we support everywhere except for IE6? And then we figure out a strategy for IE6. So for chat, we recently did a huge overhaul of chat and made it better. And we're like, fuck, chat is killing us. Like chat sucks in IE6. It's so slow. We've got this huge queue of bug reports for chat. How do we fix this? Like, oh, we can fix it by not serving IE6 chat. So we just stopped. And anecdotally, it made our bug report queue drop by 60%. 2% of users, 60% of bug reports. Fail sauce. As far as other progressive enhancements, we're exploring technology right now that will enable us to have a baseline for mobile browsers, because that's where progressive enhancements really kick ass. Like in desktop browsers, everything kind of supports everything except for IE6 and IE7 for the most part. IE8 gets there, but like Android versus BlackBerry browser, huge difference. So for those contexts, we're looking into a single data source sort of provider that provides this wealth of data to the client, and the client figures out what the browser environment that it's in can do, and serves it up what it can handle. And that's sort of, we're testing that right now. We're doing some cool stuff there. I can't talk about it too much because it's still very, very alpha, but we haven't done a great job of it so far. So far we've done, each browser context gets its own people who build their own sort of version of everything for it. And we're realizing it's a huge waste of man hours, and progressive enhancements are the way to not waste time building the same thing over and over again for iOS versus Android versus BlackBerry. More questions?
So when you're adding things or taking things away, do you generally use the DOM methods, or are you using inner HTML a lot, or is there like a general way you go about replacing?
It depends. So the question was if you said if we're removing things from the browser, adding things to the browser, to the page,
Right.
do we use DOM for it? Gotcha. In the pagelet context, I believe what we do is we always reparse the HTML for security reasons. We reparse it by using DOM create element method. So we actually create the DOM nodes for it and apply all the styles to it and everything, like just basically re-rendering the input that we've gotten. And then we use the DOM append method as opposed to inner HTML, which accepts a string and inserts a string and then turns it magically by the browser's methods, which is very unsafe. It's a little bit faster, but it's very unsafe because you're basically just accepting whatever you got from the server and sticking it right into the person's page. We probably do that in some places, but I don't know anything about that. I think overall that we try to stick to the safe methods using like append or remove. Questions? Yeah? Cool. I guess we're out of time. Yeah. I'm Jackson. I'll be over here in this area or downstairs. You'll find me wearing this shirt. I work at Facebook, looking for a job.